Wyatt Boone stood at the edge of the tree line, above the last fence post of Pine Creek, where the grass gave way to bare granite and the wind came down off the peaks with a smell he had learned never to ignore. He had not slept in the settlement for 9 years. He had not needed a reason to come down from the mountain in almost as long. But that morning, he stood there anyway, his eyes fixed on a bank of gray cloud gathering behind the highest ridge, and he said to no one but himself, "This winter isn't coming, it's hunting." Down in the valley, the ranchers were toasting another good season. Warm stoves, full barns, gold in the bank. Samuel Whitmore stood on the porch of the trading post with a glass in his hand, laughing at a joke someone had made about the wild-haired hermit who lived above the tree line. 3 days later, the richest men in Pine Creek would be on their knees in the snow, begging that same hermit to save their children. No one knew it yet, but the mountain already did. Stick around, because before this story ends, you're going to want to know exactly how far this town had to fall before it learned what real strength looks like. And hey, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I'd love to say hello. The man above the valley. Wyatt lived 2 miles above Pine Creek in a cabin he had built with his own hands, log by log, the same summer his son had learned to walk. That was a different life, a life with a woman named Sarah in it, and a boy named Caleb, and a future that did not include 10 winters spent talking mostly to a dog and a wood stove. He kept to a rhythm now. Wake before light, check the traps, split wood until his shoulders ached in a way that felt almost peaceful. Watch the sky the way other men watch their bank balance. Abigail Carter came up the trail twice a month, sometimes more, with a covered pot of stew balanced against her hip, and a stubbornness that Pine Creek had never quite managed to wear down. She was a widow herself, running her small homestead alone, since her husband had died of a fever 2 winters back. The town saw her kindness toward Wyatt as strange. She saw it as simple decency, and she was not the sort of woman who needed the town's permission to be decent. "You're going to freeze up here one of these winters, and nobody will find you until spring," she told him, setting the pot on his table. "Wouldn't be the first time something froze on this mountain," Wyatt said quietly. Abigail did not flinch at that. She had learned, over their visits, when to let his silences sit undisturbed. "Eleanor says you used to guide hunting parties clear to the Continental Divide. Says you knew every creek bed and pass better than the men who'd lived here 20 years. Eleanor talks too much. Eleanor's usually right, though." Wyatt allowed himself something close to a smile, and for a moment, the cabin felt less like a place a man went to disappear. The town that mocked wisdom. Pine Creek sat fat and comfortable at the base of the mountains, its wealth built on cattle, and Samuel Whitmore's iron grip on nearly every deal that mattered. Samuel was 54 years old, silver-bearded, and convinced that a man's worth could be measured by the size of his herd and the cut of his coat. When Wyatt came down for supplies that week, Samuel was holding court outside the trading post, and he did not miss the chance to make an example of him. "There he is," Samuel called out, loud enough for half the street to hear. "The mountain hermit graces us with his presence. Tell me, Boone, you finally run out of squirrel meat up there?" A few of the men laughed. Luke Harper, 25, and eager to keep his job on the Whitmore ranch, laughed along with them, though something in his face didn't quite agree with the sound coming out of his mouth. Wyatt didn't answer the insult. Instead, he looked past Samuel, toward the peaks, where the sky had taken on a color he recognized from a long time ago. You're going to want to bring your herd down off the high pasture before the week is out, Wyatt said. And you'd be wise to stock double what you usually do for winter. Samuel's grin widened. Is that so? And what exactly does a man who talks to pine cones know about weather that I don't? I know this mountain remembers everything, Wyatt said, including the men who ignore it. He turned and walked back toward the trail, and Samuel's laughter followed him the whole way, joined by half the street, while young Ethan Whitmore, watching from the porch rail, did not laugh at all. Abigail's quiet faith. That evening, Abigail found Wyatt sitting outside his cabin, watching the clouds bank up against the ridgeline in a way that made even the sturdy pines look small. They laughed at you again, she said. It wasn't a question. They always do. Doesn't it bother you? Wyatt considered the question honestly, the way he considered most things. Used to. Now I mostly worry what happens to the ones who won't listen. Abigail sat beside him on the bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Teach me to read it. The sky. What you see up there that they don't. He pointed toward a thin, high line of cloud stretched like a blade across the western peaks. That's the leading edge. When it drops low and thickens, and the wind swings out of the northwest instead of the west, that's when the real trouble starts moving in. And right now? Right now, it's still deciding. They sat together as the light went gold, then gray, then gone, and for the first time in years, Wyatt let himself notice how easy it was to breathe when someone sat beside him who did not need him to be anything other than what he was. Later that week, Eleanor Brooks stopped Abigail outside the church, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. Eleanor was 68, the oldest woman in Pine Creek, and one of the few who remembered Wyatt before the tragedy. He used to guide parties clear over the divide when he was young, Eleanor said. Best eyes for weather I ever saw on a man. This town owes him more than it knows. They don't want to hear that, Abigail said. They will, Eleanor said. Comfortable people always learn the hard way. It's the only way they know how. What Eleanor didn't mention, because she'd promised years ago never to speak of it, was that Wyatt had quietly pulled more than a dozen lost travelers off that mountain over the years, asking nothing in return, never once knocking on a door to be thanked. And she never mentioned, either, that every winter a certain widow left a covered plate outside a certain cabin door before sunrise, and that the mountain man inside always knew exactly whose hands had left it, and never once said a word to embarrass her for it. The sky turns against Pine Creek. 4 days later, the temperature dropped 15 degrees between morning and noon. Cattle bunched together in the low pastures, bawling at a sky gone the color of old iron. Down at the smithy, Benjamin Collins set aside the shoe he was fitting and looked out his open door at the darkening ridgeline. Ben, you've seen weather like this before? Sheriff Thomas Reed asked, stepping in out of the wind. Not in 15 years, Ben said. Not since the storm that took Wyatt's family. Reed's jaw tightened. He was a fair man, not given to superstition, but he had learned to trust Ben's instincts about metal and weather alike. I'll get word out. Tell folks to bring their stock down and stay close to town. By that afternoon, half of Pine Creek had heard Wyatt's warning, secondhand, and dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken man. The other half were quietly moving their herds anyway, just in case. Samuel Whitmore was not among the cautious. He kept 200 head on the high pasture, confident that his money had never failed him yet. That night, the first true blast of the storm hit the valley, and it hit without mercy. Trapped, the blizzard came down off the mountain like something with a grudge to settle. Snow fell sideways, driven by wind that peeled shingles from roofs and buried fence lines within hours. Roads vanished. The temperature dropped so fast that water froze in buckets left too close to open doors. By morning, 3 ranch hands were missing near the eastern draw. A family's cabin roof had collapsed under the weight of snow, and Ethan Whitmore, Samuel's 17-year-old son, was trapped in a supply wagon high on the mountain pass, having ridden up before dawn to check on the stranded cattle his father refused to abandon. Samuel stood on his porch as the storm screamed around him, and for the first time in his life, his wealth could not fix a single thing that mattered. His horses could not climb the drifts. His hired men did not know the trails. His money meant nothing to a mountain that did not accept payment. "Somebody find my son," he said. To no one, to everyone, his voice cracking in a way the town had never heard from him. Sheriff Reed looked at the wall of white beyond the porch rail and said the only true thing he could. "There's only one man alive who can find him in that." Pride breaks. Samuel rode up the mountain trail himself, half frozen, his fine coat soaked through, and found Wyatt already outside his cabin, packing rope and a lantern and a coil of canvas onto a sled. "Boone!" Samuel's voice had none of its usual command left in it. "My son is up on the pass. I need your help." Wyatt looked at him for a long moment. There was no triumph in his face, no satisfaction at watching a proud man finally bend. Only the calm of someone who had already decided, long before Samuel arrived, that he would go. "I was leaving in 5 minutes anyway," Wyatt said. "Grab that second lantern." Samuel blinked, thrown off by the absence of the reckoning he had braced for. "You're not going to make me ask twice, after everything I said to you." "There's a boy up there," Wyatt said simply. "The rest doesn't matter tonight." Luke Harper arrived minutes later, breathless, having run the whole way from the bunkhouse. "I'm coming too," he said. "I should have spoken up before. I didn't. I'm not making that mistake twice." Wyatt studied him, then nodded once, and the 3 of them started up into the white. The mountain fights back. The wind at higher elevation was a living thing, shoving them sideways, stealing the breath from their lungs. Wyatt moved like a man reading a map, only he could see, cutting between rock outcrops that broke the worst of the gusts. Avoiding a frozen creek bed he knew turned to thin ice under fresh snow. At one crossing, Samuel's boot broke through the ice, and the cold water beneath nearly took him down the slope before Wyatt's hand closed around his collar and hauled him back onto solid ground. "Careful," Wyatt said. "This mountain doesn't care how much you're worth." Samuel, soaked and shaking, managed something close to a laugh. "You've been saying that for years, and I never once believed you." "You're starting to," Wyatt said. "That's something." Luke, meanwhile, was discovering just how much he didn't know. He tied a knot wrong. He nearly walked off a snow ledge that Wyatt hauled him back from at the last second. But he kept moving, kept learning, and somewhere in that punishing climb, Wyatt started trusting him with real work instead of just company. Buried secrets. They found shelter for a few minutes in a rock overhang, and it was there, huddled against the wind, that Samuel finally said the thing he'd carried silently for 10 years. "Your wife and boy," he said, staring at the fire Wyatt had somehow coaxed to life. "The winter they died. You came to me for stronger horses. I turned you down because you couldn't pay full price up front." Wyatt didn't look up from the flame. "I remember. Those weak horses you were left with. They gave out in the storm. I've carried that." "I know," Wyatt said quietly. "I've known for years." Samuel's voice cracked. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because blaming you wouldn't have brought them back," Wyatt said, and I had enough weight to carry without adding yours to it. Samuel put his face in his hands, and for the first time in his adult life, wept in front of another man without shame. Avalanche. They reached the wagon near dusk, only to find Ethan gone from it, having tried to walk toward town on his own when the cold became unbearable. Fresh tracks led along a steep slope above a narrow gully, and Wyatt's stomach dropped the moment he recognized where they led. "That's an avalanche chute," he said. "He's walking straight under it." They moved as fast as the storm allowed, and they were still 100 yards off when the slope let go with a sound like the whole mountain exhaling. Snow thundered down in a wall of white, swallowing the gully whole, swallowing Ethan with it. Samuel screamed his son's name into the wind. Luke froze in horror. Wyatt was already moving, cutting across the debris field, reading the pattern of the settled snow the way he'd read 100 slides before. "He's under here," Wyatt said, dropping to his knees near a slight depression in the snow. "There's an air pocket where the debris piled against that boulder. Dig where I dig. Nowhere else." He tunneled through collapsing snow with his bare hands, ice cutting his fingers, the tunnel threatening to cave with every scoop. Luke and Ben, who had caught up minutes before, passed rope and dug alongside him. Samuel prayed out loud, words he hadn't spoken since his wife's funeral. Seconds before the tunnel gave way entirely, Wyatt's hand found a boot, then a leg, then Ethan's frozen, gasping face. He pulled the boy out into the storm, alive. The mountain that had once taken his own son had, on this night, given another father his back. A new spring. They carried Ethan down through the last hours of the storm and reached Pine Creek as the wind finally began to loosen its grip. The whole town gathered in the trading post to watch Samuel Whitmore, the proudest man in the valley, kneel in front of Wyatt Boone and thank him with tears freezing on his face. "I mocked you for 10 years, Samuel said, in front of everyone who had ever laughed alongside him. "You saved my only son anyway. I don't know how a man does that." "You do it because it's right," Wyatt said, "not because someone earned it." In the weeks that followed, as the snow began to melt and Pine Creek slowly rebuilt what the storm had broken, Samuel offered Wyatt a share of his ranch as payment. Wyatt turned it down. "Build a rescue station instead," Wyatt said, "up near the pass. Stock it, staff it, keep it ready every winter from now on, so no family in this valley ever loses what mine lost." Samuel agreed before Wyatt finished the sentence. Abigail found Wyatt outside his cabin that spring, the mountain behind him, green again instead of gray. "You could have taken the money," she said. "You could have taken the easy life." "I already have what I need," Wyatt said, and reached for her hand without hesitation, for the first time since she'd started climbing that trail. "I just didn't know it until this winter." Pine Creek never forgot that season, not the storm, and not the lesson underneath it, that wealth cannot buy wisdom, that pride blinds even good men to danger, and that the ones a town is quickest to mock are sometimes the only ones who can save it. Wyatt Boone stopped being the lonely man on the mountain. He became the reason Pine Creek learned what real strength looks like. And if this story moved you even a little, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this world, and drop a comment down below telling me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read everyone, and I would genuinely love to say hello.